Our next session is presented by Institute for the Future. Please welcome Gabe Cervantes, Research Manager.
Hi there, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabe Cervantes, or as my mother would say, Gabriel Cervantes. It's a pleasure to be joining you this afternoon. I'm here in Palo Alto, California, and I'm really excited about this panel discussion today, talking about the shape-shifting organizations of the future. Now, just before I dive in, a little bit about Institute for the Future, who we are and what we do. We are based here in Silicon Valley, but as far as we can tell, we are the world's longest running futures think tank in the world. And what we do is we combat short-termism, this notion of helping organizations think long about the future in an effort to build more resilient organizations. We focus on what we call urgent futures, connective technologies, and really transformation to daily life within a 10-year time frame. Now, the most important thing to remember when you talk to anyone from Institute for the Future is that we are not in the business of making predictions. Instead, what we do is create forecasts, these plausible stories about what the future could potentially hold. So my goal in today's session and in bringing this panel together is to give you a taste of what one of our foundational forecasts is for the future, the shape-shifting organization of the future. And to start off, I just want to start by showing you kind of a demo of what the shape-shifting organization of the future could look like. Again, this is not a prediction, but instead a provocation. This is a project that we did with Cisco Labs in our emerging media lab at IFTF, what we call the animated org chart. And what you're seeing here is the actual organizational chart of Cisco in virtual reality. Everyone's roles and everyone's places have been placed into VR, and you can see the way that they're connected, the way that teams, the way that roles work, the way that work operates. And this really is a really good provocation and insight into what the shape-shifting organization of the future looks like. Now, let me back up just a little here. In order to understand the shape-shifting organizations of the future, you really have to understand this slide here. Now, many years ago, we started with centralized networks, and a lot of you are going to be very familiar and even experts in this area, far better experts at this than I am. But we operated in these centralized networks where there was one central node where all information passed through. Now, when the Institute was founded, one of our founding fathers, Paul Barron, was approached by the US government, and during the time of the World War, was asked by the government to think about a system, to think about a network that could resist nuclear attack. And from that emerged the idea of a decentralized network, this image that you see here in the middle, where there are several nodes in the network, so that in case that the enemy could successfully attack the network, one or two nodes would come down, but the entire network could continue to operate while we either fixed, repaired, or replaced the nodes that were attacked. Decentralized networks is essentially how the internet works, what we call packet switching, what used to be known originally as hot potato routing. But packet switching, the central technology behind the internet as we know it today. Now, our job is to look long, to look out into the future. And as we do, it's becoming increasingly clear that we're moving from a centralized to a decentralized to a truly distributed network, a truly distributed future, where not only everything is decentralized, but truly distributed. Now, by 2030, most organization charts at companies like those that you are in today will look something like this. They will have no center. There will be authority and governance is going to be completely distributed, and there will be less centralization. Hierarchies are going to be flexible, what we call liquid hierarchies. Hierarchies will still exist, but they'll come and go. The hierarchies of the past, the rigid hierarchies of the past, are no longer going to exist, and we have to prepare for that reality. These organizations are going to grow from the edges. And this is great news for an organization like high tech, because the edges is where diversity flourishes. The edges is where really unique innovations start to sprout, and unique opportunities for people like those of you watching today are going to exist. And finally, one of the stressful things about the shape-shifting future, about the shape-shifting organizations of the future, is that they can't be controlled. This notion of command and control that we used to operate from in the past is no longer going to work in this future distributed and decentralized world. Now, these networks can be guided. They can be guided directionally, but we have to understand as leaders that we have to be willing to give up control. Now, the way that the shape-shifting organizations come from really is rooted in this foundational forecast from distinguished fellow Bob Johansen. And he writes in his book, The New Leadership Literacies, that anything that can be distributed will be distributed. And that's the distributed future that we're looking for. And that distributed future is going to give us organizational landscapes that look like this: constantly growing, constantly moving, hierarchies that are constantly in flux, always in motion. Now, there is some good news and some bad news to this. The good news is that there's more flexibility to scale up and down for an organization, for individuals, for customers. There's just a lot more flexibility in this kind of world. For the worker, there's more ways to make a living. And especially, this is especially true for those that are ready for the gig economy, for freelance type work. Now, the bad news about these shape-shifting networks is that unfortunately, criminal organizations, criminal networks are far better at shape-shifting than the rest of us are. If you go and you talk to any of the experts in the military and you ask them how these criminal organizations operate, they will tell you that they operate in a shape-shifting fashion. Criminals are far better than the rest of us in business at shape-shifting. In this world of shape-shifting organizations, there are fewer traditional jobs. And so these fundamental questions about what does career advancement look like in a fluid organization start to arise. And really, there's no clear answer today as to what the answer to that question will be. And finally, for the individual, for the worker, this is going to be an awful future if you can't adapt to the gig economy and to freelance work. Now, in conclusion, this is what we call economies of organization, not just economies of scale. And the difference here is that economies of scale in the past meant that the bigger you were, the more influence you had, the more power you had, the more powerful you were, and the more stable you were as a company, as an organization. Unfortunately, we forecast that as we go out into the future, this is no longer going to be the case. It's going to be a future where it's not about scale, it's about organization. This is a future where you will be what you can organize. Now, some examples, some signals. At Institute for the Future, we love tracking what we call signals of change. These present day innovations, these present day kind of on the fringe, edgy innovations that are happening that give us a clue as to what the future could look like. So I went out looking for some examples of shape-shifting organizations. Where is it starting to take off? And the first one I came up with is Colony.io. And this is a social collaboration platform where anyone can come in and sign up to different projects. And there are a number of different projects on this site. So developers come on and they sign up according to what skills they have. And these self-assembling teams gather. And at the end of a project, what ends up happening is that all of the members of the project end up grading each other. And the way that they're grading themselves on is what contribution you contributed, how much of your effort resulted in the final product. So for example, if I'm on a project and I only do 5% of the work, but my 5% counts for 80% of the project's success, my ranking becomes higher in the world of Colony.io. And so people on this platform start to build a reputation, start to build kind of a bit of celebrity for themselves. And as you go and work on more projects and get better and better ratings from other teams, from other people within the social collaboration platform, your ranking just moves up and you're able to go to higher paying and more fun tasks, more fun roles. Now, the second signal is Arcade City. And Arcade City has been around for a couple years now. They're a startup based in Austin, Texas. And Arcade City really was founded by two disgruntled Uber employees. And they said, listen, this Uber model doesn't make sense. I don't understand why there's a middleman here taking a piece of the profit. And so going on the blockchain, Arcade City is trying to be Uber without Uber, connecting riders and drivers directly without the middleman in the middle. Now, since they started a couple years ago, Arcade City has expanded to more than just ride sharing. And they now do contracts, they now do elder care, they do a number of different services. And they've gamified the entire experience to create what they call this city, this virtual city where you can go in, create guilds, and again, create a reputation for yourself, gather together with a couple partners and start a business on the Arcade City network and be known for being able to accomplish work. Again, the shape-shifting organization of the future is all about impact. It's all about measuring impact. And that's one of the greatest benefits that we have from moving here. And so as leaders, we have to understand that shape-shifting organizations are going to require great clarity about where we want to take our organizations, where we want to take our products, where we want to take our customers. But it's going to require great flexibility in how you get there. Imagine how you will operate as a company in a world where, we're operating as Ubers without Ubers. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for your organization? What does that mean for your leadership style? And so those are some of the questions that we're going to try and tackle today. And with that, it's my absolute honor and my privilege to introduce our two panelists for today, Fernando Paz and Ellen Sheehan. Thank you both for joining me here today. Bring the two of you who are partners of the Institute for the Future and just bring you on and hear a little bit about how shape-shifting organizations have started to look like and take off in your world. So why don't we start with some introductions? And Ellen, can we start with you, please?
Happy to. Thank you, Gabe. I'm Ellen Sheehan. I'm Executive Director of HEART at UCLA. I'm in Los Angeles, so we're all in different places. HEART at UCLA is a human resources executive roundtable affiliated with the Anderson School of Management and the Luskin School of Public Affairs. And what we do at HEART is we look at the best practices and the future of human resources and the future of organizations so that we can prepare our members to be ready, to be future ready in what they're doing. So prior to that, I was head of human resources for Princess Cruises, had a leadership role in human resources and banking. So I have a variety of backgrounds, but the most important thing for us is looking towards the future. And so we're great fans of Gabe and his work because we know that we need to move our thinking and all of our employees to a new level. So I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And do we have Fernando on the line?
Hey, Gabe. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. And now I think we're bringing you to the screen here. Now, Fernando, this is a perfect example of the future, right? The future is so unpredictable. And especially in a world where we're trying to run these virtual summits, you have to be prepared for everything. You have to be shape-shifting in your approach to everything. But Fernando, welcome. Could you please just briefly introduce yourself to everyone on today's seminar?
Sure. Hey, Gabe. Hi, Ellen. Good to see you. Hi, everybody. My name is Fernando Paz, and I'm super happy to be here. I am the senior software director for Cox Automotive. And what we do at Cox Automotive is I'm responsible for writing for a team of engineers that write SaaS software and provide advanced analytics to our customers, which consist of auto dealers throughout North America. And through our software, we provide them the advanced analytics that they need to run their businesses and be profitable. And I'm super happy to be here. So thanks.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, Ellen. So I think it's becoming quite clear why I chose the two of you to come on, right? When we're talking about shape-shifting organizations, who better than to talk to someone about software, data analytics, visualization, machine learning, but also the human resources perspective, right? The people aspect of this. So Ellen and Fernando, I've told you this before, but just as a reminder, right? Our goal as futurists is not to get people to necessarily agree with our forecasts, but to be provoked by them, right? What we're looking for is provocation here. And so let me just ask you, when you hear this idea of the shape-shifting organization of the future, what are the provocations that start to come to mind? Again, not necessarily having to agree with any or all of it, but what are some of the provocations and the ideas, the insights that start to emerge as you think about your organizations, what it is that you're tasked with, and this notion of shape-shifting organizations. And Fernando, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks, Gabe. And it certainly is provocative, and from our previous conversation, it's really generated a tremendous amount of thought. And one of the things, or a couple of things that kind of came to mind as I thought about it was, there's a couple of tenets that I think shape-shifting is actually. One of them is the idea of agency or empowerment at the edge, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of decision making that seems to be getting pushed out edges, and another aspect of that is this idea, in order to enable that and be productive, I think there's this concept of and you kind of touched upon it, away from straight up command and control to more of a commander's intent model, where everybody throughout the shape-shifted organization understands the commander's intent, or what the objective is, or the outcome that's expected. But then everybody within the organization is empowered and has agency to deliver that outcome as best as they see fit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fernando. Some important lessons that come out of the military there, right? Things like commander's intent, right? Moving from command and control, where you used to have the highest ranking officer who would said, go and do this. And then, people would go and do it. Switching to what we call now commander's intent, saying, what is the intent behind the mission? What are we trying to accomplish? And from there, every individual has the agency and the permission to act out accordingly in order to reach that end goal. Perfectly summed up. Thank you, Fernando. Ellen, let's go to you. Reactions, provocations.
So if I were to follow what Fernando's thinking, when you look at traditional organizational structure, they have for many years and still are very hierarchical. And we have the CEO and president at the top, we have the functions. So this approach is totally different and is going to have an impact on how organizations are structured. But additionally, I think that it's going to affect how individual jobs are structured. Where before or now, we know that we have job descriptions, we have all the requirements and the competencies aligned, but going forward, it's going to really change the not only the competencies, but the behaviors that will be necessary to succeed in an environment. So at the very high level, it's going to change how organizations approach work. But then when you bring it into a human resources, and we can talk about what areas going forward, but what it's going to do is it's going to change really every element of the human touch points within an organization, whether it be recruiting, compensation, job assignment, everything that we know today is going to be modified and will change in a shape-shifting organization.
Absolutely. And Ellen, let me just ask you here, are you excited for that change? You know, having been a human resources professional for, you know, a couple of years, is that something exciting? Is that or is that something completely terrifying?
Well, so from my perspective, it's thrilling. I think that it's a very exciting opportunity. We had a professor at UCLA say at one time, "This is the direction that we're going." The human resources group sitting in the room looked a little perplexed, and he said, "Don't worry, it's going to happen whether you get on board or not." And I think that's what's exciting. I think it's very exciting, particularly to have these kinds of insights to try to get a plan, which it's complicated, and to attack how we're going to go forward. But I think it's really going to bring the more to you as we combine both the technical and the human aspects. It's really going to give employees and individuals a greater opportunity to develop, to express, to be creative. So I'm very excited about the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ellen. Now, Fernando, it's almost impossible to have a convening these days and not talk about the global pandemic that we're currently in, this crisis that we're facing. But when we think of COVID-19 and shape-shifting organizations, one of the ways that we like to frame things and think about this are, what are the opportunities and what are the threats that, you know, a big event like COVID-19 presents? So as we look at the life-altering shifts that have happened within the last 2 years or so since COVID, you know, everyone working from home, everyone working remotely, you know, essential workers, non-essential workers, vaccines, all that good stuff or bad stuff that comes with it, right? What are the opportunities and what are the threats when it comes to a shape-shifting organization?
Sure. So I think this is a great question. And I'll just start with kind of the impact that we're just seeing straight up in our business. You know, so we're in the automotive business. Our clients are automotive dealers, and traditionally they're not on the cutting edge of technology. You know, because the margins are so thin, they've figured out how their business and they've dialed it in over the years, and it's been passed on from family to family. And so introducing technology is one of the challenges that we overcome to be successful as a business. With COVID-19, what we have seen, and I think many of you can relate, is this massive overnight move to digitization. And so with that, we're finding that even in our industry, which typically is not on the leading edge, they've been disrupted overnight. The way we wholesale cars, the way we retail, the way our dealers wholesale car and retail cars have been disrupted overnight to be digital. And so that opens up a tremendous amount of opportunities, because now we've been working remotely as a product provider for over a year. And our organization, it's interesting because it's full circle. On the production side, on the software production side, we've gone 100% remote. And in our case, our customers, on the ones that consume our services, have also gone pretty much, and we're running remote for a very long time. And so it's completely changed the landscape on both ends of the production curve, if you will.
Got it. And Fernando, is that, let me ask you, is that scary? Is that exciting? Is that, you know, finally it's happening? What's been the reaction there?
No, it's mixed, right? Is the honest truth. For me personally, it's incredibly exciting when I see what it's doing to the market that we serve. The fact that it is leaning into digitization, and now we have the ability to provide productivity gains to our customers in a way that is super meaningful. And so from that perspective, it's super exciting. From the perspective of my teams, the working from home has been, I think, really good. When mixed in with some of the isolation that COVID specifically brought about, that led to some of the difficulties, right? That led to some of the challenges. I think if we think past that, move away from that, and we have like a normal operating society outside of walls, but we have the ability and the freedom to work from wherever we want, I think that's the perfect nirvana, and I'm very excited about that.
Got it. Got it.
Gabe, I might add to that point on COVID. What we see from the human resources side, many of the things that Fernando said, but one of the comments that we've gotten is that employees, that work was disrupted, and so employees have had to either, because of the organizational changes or whatever, employees have had to pick up additional competencies, do tasks they haven't done in the past, think in a different way, which to me is absolutely a foundation to shape-shifting thinking, because now all of a sudden it's not just, you just don't do, as I'd said before, your job description. You have to think about other things, and you're asked to do other things. And the comments I've gotten back from human resources executives is that it's been amazing to see how many people could step up to that and change very quickly and be very productive.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Thanks for that addition. Now, there's a question here from the audience that I'd like to throw to you, Ellen. And the question is, how can the workforce prepare for this new type of organization? And I think you've given us some hints to that, but how would you respond to that question?
So I think that the capabilities, I think that one of the things that we know now, and it's going to be ever so important, is continuous learning. And so we can't get comfortable in doing one task, one system, one application. It's going to be continuously learning, not only within your function, but understanding what else is happening in your environment or with the competitors, or possibly not competitors, because there'll be a lot of creative ideas that are being done in another industry. So it's continuous learning, and it's also flexibility. We are going to have to be very open to change. We are going to have to if there is an opportunity in a shape-shifting environment to work on a project, it's going to be raise your hand even if you're not comfortable, and dive in and take and understand that you have to contribute and participate. So I think the most important thing is have a very open mind, be very curious, and to be a good learner.
Absolutely. And Ellen, I would even add to that, right? That notion of who's an employee, right? Who's in your workforce? That question, actually, we need to rethink that, right? Because a lot of this here, we're not looking at employees, we're looking at contributors. Who are the contributors to your work? Who are the contributors to your shape-shifting organization? And a contributor, Fernando, that could be you one day and then not you the next day, right? And so how do we prepare our organizations for that super fluid workforce, right? That super fluid structure moving forward into the future?
No, that's right. That's right, Gabe. And I guess one of the things that we've actually done that I think is in alignment with this line of thinking and this conversation is that performance management perspective. We've pivoted away from being a task-based, task-oriented model to a much more outcomes-based model. And so rather than talking about, hey, these are all the things I did this quarter, we talk about, hey, what were the outcomes that were achieved for the business, for our customers, commensurate with each individual role. And that little pivot actually makes a huge difference, because when people are talking about outcomes, and kind of the way you go about achieving those outcomes is kind of doesn't really matter if you get the outcome. That is a massive expression of agency down to the lowest levels of the organization. So in a software space, which is the space that I'm in, remote working is feasible. Idea of being outcomes focused is one of the things that we've done to prepare and to align with a more fluid and flexible resourcing model.
Yeah, no, Fernando, I think that's right. And one of the questions that comes from the audience, is related to that. And they say, in this distributed model, who manages the purse strings? and what prevents rogue edge cases, right? I think we're starting to touch on that. And let me just give you one of the lessons that we learned. And I've mentioned distinguished fellow Bob Johansen from Institute for the Future. Absolute brilliant mind in the world of futures thinking and strategic foresight. He's been at the Institute for 47 of the 52 years we've been around. And one of the lessons that I've learned from him is he presented this notion of shape-shifting organizations to an executive at a very large company. And he said that when the executive saw the diagram of the shape-shifting organization, he leaned in and he said, where do I sit? As the leader, as the executive, where do I sit, right? And Bob said, well, really, you're kind of at the foundation. You're everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And so I think part of the answer is that, that level of leadership, that level of oversight does not go away, but it shifts and it alters in a way. But let me ask you, in this distributed model, who manages the purse strings? And that very interesting question, what prevents the rogue edge cases? Fernando, let's start with you.
Sure. So absolutely, balance is necessary, at least as we sit here today and with what we know today. And so we balance the outcomes and the agency associated with achieving those outcomes with what we call containers. And so the container is, hey, these are boundaries that are defined for these specific outcomes. And within these boundaries, have at it. But if there is a specific, for example, an easy one is we use a specific tool set. Mm-hmm. So we need to use a specific tool set because for a variety of reasons. So we just ask, use the specific tool set, but within that, have at it. So that kind of an idea, which is total agency around achieving the outcome with some defined boundaries.
That's great. Thank you. Ellen, you've been working with IFTF for a while now, and you are quite familiar with this notion of signals of change. Now, let me ask you, in your view, in your world, what are some signals of change around the shape-shifting organizations of the future that you're starting to see?
Well, I think number one, it's talent and it's selection. It's how are we recruiting? Because now it's not just looking for experience. This person has done something that mirrors a job that we're recruiting for. It's potential. And so how do you identify skills and abilities that can operate within a shape-shifting organization? So that would be one way. I think a very important aspect that needs to be covered is just communications. What Fernando had said about performance management, I think how companies are organizing their communications, whether it be formal or informal. Companies often in traditional organizations have silos where no one knows what the other person is doing. Clearly, in a shape-shifting organization, there's going to have to be a lot of overlapping of human networks. There's going to have to be a lot of clarity in terms of who's responsible for what. And part of that responsibility is going to be communicating status where achievements are being made. And then I think the other is companies are already moving to the new model of performance management. But within that, I think what's going to really change, and it'll be a natural evolution, is managers are going to get evaluated and leaders are going to be evaluated. And the fact that it's not just I'm keeping track of how you've performed, it's going to be how has the group, the community supported each other. So I would say that's something that companies are now moving towards.
Got it. That's great. Thank you, Ellen. Now, I'd love to open, just the Q&A portion of this session. So folks in the audience, if you have any questions, please continue to send those in. We'd love to open that up now. But Fernando, in highly regulated industries, how does governance work in this model?
Yeah, I read that question. It's a very good question. I applaud the person who asked it. I don't know. I'm just going to, I think I'm just going to fall back on a little bit on my previous answer around it. It's within at least the way we're doing it today it's within this definition of these containers, and those containers provide the boundaries or the governance. We still have a hierarchical system around that. But it did change. And Ellen, to the point that you made, which is, I remember being in an organization where if there was a significant achievement, they asked the 5 whys, but they asked the 5 whos, like who was responsible for it? No, but who was responsible for it, right? And what's cool is in our outcomes-based organization, we don't have that conversation. It's like, hey, did we as an organization or as the entity achieve outcome? Fantastic. Did everybody operate within their given roles to help achieve that outcome? Absolutely. So that is a level of governance, if you will. And I view it as a little bit different than before, where we asked the 5 whos. And now it's like, hey, way to go. Everybody did their role to achieve the outcome.
Now, one of the other questions that comes in is, are shape-shifting organizations more resilient? And why is that the case? And I think this is, I don't think there's a clear answer yet. I think we are starting to see some shape-shifting organizations or some organizations that have pieces of shape-shifting that have great success, but really, really inherent challenges, right? Now, the great thing about signals of change is that signals of change tend to fail, but they tend to fail in an interesting way. And it's that failure that really points us to what the future success is going to look like. Now, being here in Silicon Valley, one of the things that we see is that, there's really no true innovation that happens overnight. Any true innovation, any true change, any true shift has taken somewhere from 30 to 50 years to be tried and tested. And the same is true of these shape-shifting organizations, right? It's just if you're not paying attention, that's when it feels like it's brand new. That's when it feels like it's come out of left field. So let me just turn to both of you and say, what are some things some elements of the shape-shifting organization that maybe organizations you've worked with in the past or organizations that you're currently working with have tried to do, but have failed, have really, not lasted very long. And there's this sense of, we tried it before, it doesn't make sense to try it again. Ellen, let's start with you.
Well, I'm not sure I have an exact example of that, but I can say more on a generalized basis. Oftentimes in organizations that I've worked with, introducing innovation, you often hear, oh, well, we've done this before, it failed, or you sort of get shut down before you can move forward. And so I think part of it is, how do you create an organization of the future? How do you have your leaders positioned so that they are encouraging people on their team to be risk takers, to fail? I think that failure, you often see individuals who may not be successful in a project, and then a year later that project emerges as something that was the greatest idea that ever happened. So I think I think my answer would be, it happens, but how are you creating an environment where failure is not such a bad thing, because it's going to lead you to the next growth element, and that people are allowed to voice opinions, take risks, etc.
Fernando, any examples from you?
Sure, I have plenty of failure examples. I'll share one of them with you. But actually, before that, I want to circle back to the highly regulated question, because I had a thought after my turn passed, which is, on the one hand, maybe part of the answer is dovetailing on what you said. The highly regulated industries will lag in this transformation. That said, I think one of the current examples of kind of shape shifting or fluidity at the edge is cryptocurrency itself. And it is it's the wild, wild west within cryptocurrency. That said, I was just reading just last week that Visa is positioning itself, highly regulated financial company, financial services company, positioning itself to be the leader in cryptocurrency. And so somewhere between those two lies the answer. I think lies some of the answers, which is maybe things still stay regulated a little bit, even though they were started off being deregulated. So I don't know, but we do see those things happening. Talk about failure. So this is kind of a very recent failure for me in terms of the fluid type of an organization. One of the things that I value is agility and the ability to pivot and react and move fast. And I extend that even to my teams. And so we have a need over here. Let's be very fluid and let's reshuffle teams and do that. And that was met with resounding failure, not because we didn't achieve the outcome, but because I overlooked the very human element that was called to my attention around some people that have been working together for a time enjoy working together. And when and I guess the fluidity was initiated from the top, not at the edge, and maybe that's part of the problem. But when the fluidity or the need for that fluidity top down in this example disrupted the sense of camaraderie that the team had already developed because they were split out, that was not a good week for me.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's true. That's the case, right, Fernando? Thank you for that. I will tell you from our shoes, from our perspective at Institute for the Future, right? We think about this all the time, right? We aren't that good at implementing it all the time, but I was just in a meeting this morning, and we were realizing, we were discussing what's a new methodology, what's a new framework, what's a new way of thinking about structuring XYZ. And what we realize is that we're really good at starting new things, but never carrying through to the end, right? And so this constant shape shifting, we almost lose some of this institutional knowledge, right? The lessons and the patterns and what worked in the past, right? In the previous iterations, we almost, erase the board and just start all over again when you don't necessarily have to do that. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges.
That was a conversation that we were having around that, which is, hey, if you're solely focused on outcomes based and you really don't care how that outcome is achieved, as long as it's done ethically and legally and all that good stuff, then you lose this idea of best practices. Yeah. And so I echo that statement that you just made, because we're just having that conversation on our end as well.
Absolutely. Well, just final question as we get ready to close the session here. I love this question. Obviously, we're here with high tech. We're here with an organization that is specific with Hispanic, Latino, Latinx community members. And the question is, with the advent of shape-shifting orgs, with an already significant gap in tech within the Latinx community, how do you proactively introduce strategies and does diversity take a hit initially as a result? And how can you prevent or mitigate this? I think this is such a great loaded question. I really love this. And I don't know that I have the answer, but I'd love to hear just your closing thoughts on that, Fernando and Ellen. Why don't we start with Fernando, please?
Okay, sure, I'll jump in. So I actually think that this enables the edge. And the edge in this case is global, right? So this enables enables access to maybe communities that lacked access for whatever reasons. The first of which being geographic, right? You no longer have to sit in Silicon Valley to work for Silicon Valley, or you don't have to sit in Austin, Texas to work for Austin-based companies, et cetera. We have, it opens up to the world. And so I think I'm just going to close with Ellen's statement and encouragement, which is train and get ready and be prepared, because the opportunities will be there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fernando. Ellen, final thoughts.
I would add that as we move into this type of an organization and there is more working with teams, it's been proven, there is research that diversity, not only diversity of gender, ethnicity, experience, but just diversity of thinking, backgrounds, bring a better product. So I think that organizations, I know I can see that they have a stronger appreciation for having diverse teams, a diverse workforce. So the opportunity is there, and it's going to be, how do employees prepare to take advantage of those opportunities? And I think on an individual basis, I think there's a lot to be said about raise your hand. And I think that there's going to be so many different ways to manage a career, but it's not going to be for the person who's not willing to jump in and take advantage of it, regardless of where they've been, and to make mistakes,
Absolutely.
because that is going to be part of the growth.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ellen and Fernando. Truly a pleasure to have you both here. I'd love to thank the high tech community for the invitation, for allowing us to come on. High tech is a partner of the Institute for the Future, just like UCLA Heart and just like Cox is. So you can always go to iftf.org for more research, more information. Today's presentation, we will be forwarding to everyone in attendance here. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good rest of the Leadership Summit.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
And now, a word from our partners.
Connected Enterprise harnesses the power of data, analytics, and insights.
Customers today have high expectations of everything.
Personal data is willingly shared as long as there is adequate trust. In return, they expect seamless experiences which are driven by insight-led organizations.
The Connected Enterprise not only sees insights everywhere, they act on them.
And turns them into opportunities.
The right tools unlock incredible possibilities. Use them to transform customers' interactions.
To make those experiences incredibly personal and frictionless.
Have curiosity in your customers' needs. Let this ignite change and power growth.
Stay ahead of global shifts in geo, political, and social. Measure customer sentiment around the world.
You can really understand the voice of the customer to really adapt your business, to be able to engage with those customers in a way that makes the most sense for them and your business.
Ultimately, transform your business.